When I first started my Spanish learning journey a few years ago, I thought that when I would become a fluent Spanish speaker, that everything was going to be perfect. I was going to know everything, communication was going to be easy, I wasn't going to be struggling anymore, and that I would not have to work as hard. Also, I thought that I was going to be one of the best Spanish-speaking gringos that you have ever heard in your life. Now, after reaching this amazing goal of speaking Spanish fluently, and after having many conversations in Spanish with myself and with native Spanish speakers, I have realized that I had the completely wrong mentality when it came to speaking Spanish fluently, because I'm definitely nowhere near perfect when it comes to communicating in Spanish, and I really don't think that even exists anymore. And this realization has been absolutely heartbreaking for me, and it's also been very difficult for me to accept, because how can I possibly speak Spanish fluently after all this time of studying and learning Spanish, but I still struggle so much to communicate in Spanish? For me, it was very difficult to comprehend how this could happen to me. So what exactly do I struggle with these days? Well, I still make mistakes when I speak Spanish. Yes, I still do. And this, again, has been very difficult for me to accept. Even yesterday, I made plenty of mistakes when I was speaking Spanish with my friend at the gym yesterday. And even today, I just got done with a call with another native Spanish speaker, and I was making mistakes again, many grammar mistakes. Many times when I'm having a conversation, I always forget which preposition to use, or I don't know how to conjugate a verb correctly, or I always forget whether I should be using the masculine version or the feminine version of a noun or an adjective. So I usually get those mixed up a lot. I still mix up words like pesa and peso. I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I've been struggling with trying to figure out when to use each of these words for the past 2 years. So that one has been driving me absolutely crazy. And then, of course, there are many pronunciation mistakes that I make. And just recently, one of my Dominican friends, he helped me out because I was saying sabiduría instead of saying sabiduría. So I still make a lot of pronunciation mistakes as well. And I thought that I was not going to be making any pronunciation mistakes at all, that everything was going to sound absolutely perfect. So this has also been very difficult for me to accept. And honestly, it's really difficult for me to even remember many conversations that I've had in Spanish where I was not making mistakes. Making mistakes for me is my normal, basically. I also thought that I was going to be speaking Spanish extremely fast. I was never going to be pausing whatsoever. Almost, or I would say, imagine if you are listening to the weather in Spanish, or you are listening to a news reporter in Spanish. You know how sometimes it seems like they don't even pause, they just continually speak Spanish for a long time? I thought that I was gonna be speaking like that, but no, I still have to take some time and think about what I want to say before I say it. Or if, for example, yesterday when I was having a conversation with my Dominican friend, he asked me a few questions and I had to, sit and think about what he just said, comprehend it, and then think about what I wanted to say. So that took some time. So for me, this has also been very difficult to accept because I thought I was only going to be able to speak just rapid fire and extremely fast, but I still struggle with how long it takes me to respond in Spanish. So that's something that I'm still working on. I really thought that I was going to be speaking Spanish without thinking at all, but it seems like these days that's basically all I do is think a lot before I actually say something when I'm having a conversation in Spanish. Sometimes when I am thinking before I speak Spanish, I am trying to find the specific word that I am looking for, but I just can't get it. So I forget what that word was, or I'm forgetting what the words that I want to say are, and I'm forgetting what the phrase is that I want to say. So this is something I also didn't plan for a few years ago, that I was actually going to be forgetting all the vocabulary that I have been studying. Well, not every single thing that I have learned, but many of the things that I used to study. If you have heard my story before, a few years back, I used to I used to review a lot of flashcards and I was studying a lot of vocabulary. A lot of this vocabulary is not a part of my active vocabulary, so I really haven't been using many of the different words and phrases that I have studied a few years ago. So this has definitely been a challenge when it comes to speaking, because I want to be able to use every single word and every single phrase that I have studied and I have worked so hard to understand, but that is not what happens. There's still so many different things that I just don't remember when I'm actually having a conversation. And I did not plan for that at all. Like I was saying, I thought it was just gonna be rapid fire words all day long. I used to connect speaking Spanish fluently with sounding like a native Spanish speaker, and that is something that I have noticed as well I have not reached at all. I don't think that I sound like a native Spanish speaker, and honestly, I don't know if I'm ever going to sound like a native Spanish speaker, really. So that was also something very strange for me, because I thought those equated to the same exact thing. But what I'm realizing right now is that there are so many different nuances when it comes to actually, sounding like a native, speaking like a native, having conversations like a native Spanish speaker. It's a lot more complex than I could have ever imagined. Fairly recently, I've learned that just because I speak Spanish fluently, that does not mean that I am very fluent in every single topic when I speak Spanish. So I'm not very knowledgeable in every single topic. So last year, for the first time, I went to a barbershop and I went to a hair salon, and my barber and my hairdresser were both native Spanish speakers. One was from the Dominican Republic and the other was from Cuba. But I felt like when we were having a conversation about the different hairstyle that I wanted and the whole process of what they were doing, I felt like I couldn't really contribute to the conversation because I just lacked so much vocabulary about this topic of hair and hairstyles and all that type of thing. So for me, that was very confusing, and I was definitely second guessing myself and kept asking myself, how can I be fluent if I can't have a conversation about hair and about hairstyles? And the same thing when it comes to having conversations about animals and nature. These are topics that I am not well versed in whatsoever in Spanish, and I will struggle every single time to have a conversation about these things because I just lack the vocabulary, and I'm definitely not used to having conversations about those topics. And actually, I have one more one more topic I'm not used to having conversations about, and that is I would say maintenance, so car maintenance, because recently I got my tires changed on my car and the mechanic was Spanish speaking. So we had a little conversation, but I was mostly just listening, and again, I couldn't really contribute much to this conversation because I know nothing about wheel rotation. I don't know anything about oil changes or that type of vocabulary in Spanish. So it was very challenging for me to have a conversation about that topic. And to add on what I was saying earlier about me forgetting vocabulary, I have had to come to the realization that when it comes to Spanish speaking fluency, I also have to maintain this fluency. I can still see a decrease in my Spanish speaking skills. It's not something that just stays even if I don't do anything at all. I still have to work very hard. I still have to practice speaking Spanish. I have to have conversations in Spanish with native Spanish speakers, but then also with myself. I constantly have to work at maintaining this fluency, maintain my level, or else I just forget things. I forget words, I forget grammar, and I even forget sounds too, like different accents. So that has been very challenging to get over as well, because I thought it was just going to be super smooth. I was not going to have to do any work at all. Once you become a fluent Spanish speaker, that's it. You got it. You don't have to work harder anymore, So that's the mentality that I had before, but now I realize that that is not the case. Unfortunately, how wonderful would it be that you would not have to work very hard once you got to a particular Spanish speaking level? That would be pretty amazing, right? But unfortunately, just like with many other skills, if you don't use them, if you don't practice them, then you will lose them, or that you will see a decrease in those skills. So that is something that right now I am trying to do constantly. always speak Spanish and always practice Spanish, so my level doesn't decrease, or at least decrease that much. And maybe you have heard this story many times from a friend or from a family member where they did know a language, or at least they could understand a decent amount of it and they could speak it to a decent level, language in high school and in college, but then after that they weren't listening to any content in that language, they weren't speaking that language, they weren't around anybody who was speaking that language, and then they just forgot everything. So that's something that I've had to take into account when it comes to speaking Spanish fluently. I have to keep it up. And now I truly see the importance of input. So listening and consuming a lot of content in Spanish. Because last year I know I really was not having, or I wasn't really watching a lot of movies or TV shows in Spanish. I probably only watched a total of 8 episodes all of last year in Spanish. Last year I didn't even watch a full movie in Spanish. So there was many words that I actually forgot, a lot of phrases that I forgot because I wasn't actively studying vocabulary, and then I also wasn't consuming content. So it wasn't really in my ears like that. Even though I was having conversations, that vocabulary still wasn't, I guess it just wasn't really present in my head. So when I tried to, I really could not use those in conversations. So that also was very strange for me as well. I didn't think that just by reducing the amount of content that I was consuming was going to make me forget a lot of vocabulary as well. So it really just enforced the idea even more so how much I have to maintain Spanish speaking fluency and always be listening to Spanish content and having conversations and really just trying to make sure that this vocabulary is in my active vocabulary, or else it's going to become passive and I'm going to forget it. Who would have thought that Spanish speaking fluency and communicating in Spanish would be so complex? So with the graph on the left here, this is exactly what I thought speaking Spanish fluently was. I thought once you start here as a Spanish learner, starting from basically day 0, it's going to be a straight line of just studying Spanish, learning Spanish, until one day you are fluent. And then after that, nothing. You just stay at this level and that's it. You don't have to do anything. Everything's, perfect. But now I see that my Spanish learning journey has not been like that whatsoever. It's definitely been very non-linear. And then I'm also realizing that even though I've reached the level of being able to speak Spanish fluently, right? Whatever happens from now and the future, that all depends on me as well. It's not this straight line, but as I was saying throughout this video, that I still have to be able to maintain my speaking skills, and there's still many challenges that I have to face as a Spanish learner. Nothing is perfect whatsoever. Fortunately, even though I've had many heartbreak moments after realizing what Spanish speaking fluency is and what it is not, I'm still able to change up the way that I am learning this beautiful language and adapt to this new knowledge that I have. If you're interested in learning more about my path to Spanish speaking fluency, watch this next video.